Morning, everybody. How we doing? It is a Tuesday morning here in Minnesota. It's supposed to get near 70 today, so it's going to be a fairly beautiful, pleasant day. Uh, Allergies are in full bloom. It's corn harvest. There's dust in the air. The construction here. It's been a tough year on my body, but we overcome, right? And that's what jazz is always here to remind us about that overcoming. Just a question I wanted to pose to y'all. What do you guys think are the five most common, familiar to most people jazz records today? And I don't think that's going to be the same five, six, seven, 10 records that we talk about now that it would have been during the jazz age. I don't think Dave Brubeck's Time Out makes that list right now. Maybe it does. What do you guys think? Stan Getz, the Bossa Nova stuff with Joao Gilberto, and are those records still hip today? They're certainly some of the best-selling jazz records of all time, but I don't feel like the vinyl community is out there promoting Brubeck and pushing Stan Getz Bossa Nova. And there's records today, for example, Hank Mobley's body of work, Lee Morgan's body of work, that are far more popular today than they were when they came out in the jazz landscape. And I think one of the toughest things to remember is just how peripheral jazz is. And I think that's something we kind of forget at times. We get so wrapped up in these the channels and the discussions and the conversations to the point of it's common language for us and a vernacular that we all share. And so Blue Note has significance to most people on these channels. Verve means something. Norman Granz means something. Alan Frank means something. We have a depth of comprehension about the jazz age today. And I think we get complacent and forget that for most people, none of that exists. And I'm sure I even take that for granted at times. For most people, Miles Davis is kind of the end. Maybe Louis Armstrong. They've probably heard of Thelonious Monk. And I'll be honest, living here in rural America, about to open this coffee shop with a jazz theme, there's plenty of people out here who couldn't name one jazz musician. And that's probably even more true for the under 30 crowd. It's just not a part of the lexicon. It's not a part of the reality. It's not a part of the history that they're being told. And so Americans, especially white Americans, are being disconnected from black arts more all the time right now. There's been attacks on so many of the great black artists and musicians, some justifiably so. Kanye's obviously an idiot, but he's always been an idiot. I've never liked what Kanye had to say, ever. When he first compared himself to the Beatles and elevated himself beyond the Beatles, elevates himself beyond Jimi Hendrix, I'm like, dude, you produce and steal sounds. He's a fine producer. I'm not a big fan of his rapping at all, nor have I ever been. Bill Cosby, what a mess that's been. But, it's a funny time. It's a funny time right now. And I think the norms of yesteryear have given way to a witch hunt that gives a lot of people an out for their own actions and their own behaviors. And ultimately, if we didn't have a culture that was so associated with shame, guilt, sin, around sexuality, I don't think a lot of this reality would exist. Animals don't have shame about sex. To enact a sexual performance and then to regret it later and to feel shame about it, that's a trained cultural, social behavior. But, it's still a convenient way for white America to dismiss all black art. R. Kelly, Michael Jackson. I mean, Usher, you better be careful. Walk real careful, Usher, because every other icon, you know what I mean, when you get to that superstar status, they're watching you. Just give them a reason. But even like the way we've become polarized about language and the N word and all that stuff, it's just given a lot of white America a reason to not even acknowledge black art. And so they're not acknowledging the art of today or the art of 2000s or the 1990s or 80s or 70s. They're certainly not going to connect with the blues and jazz and recognize the importance of that music to all American music, which is, partly why I want to do this cafe. I want to, some of the connections are so tangible once you hear them. Once you recognize that Gilmore flourish on the guitar, that's a blues inflection. You'll start to hear that stuff everywhere once you recognize it's that extracurricular sounds that is expressing feeling that captures the blues and obviously the essence of jazz as well. But yeah, what are the 5 most popular jazz records today? And I don't really know. I know Chet Baker has some pull, but the average person doesn't know that name, Chet Baker. Aside from looking like James Dean a little bit as a young guy, and being white, Bill Evans, again, outside of jazz circles, I don't know what the non-jazz world connects with or knows. And they hear jazz in soundtracks here and there, and it still creates an element of cultural sophistication and a wonderful advanced knowledge of music. These players are proving themselves as equals to their oppressors. That's the real magic. That's the power going, I'm supposed to be a lesser citizen, 2/3 human being, and let me see y'all do this. Let me see you throw that basketball down. When you excel beyond those who ridicule and fight ridicule with just a level of excellence and virtuosity and expression, which is expressed via resistance and just saying, you know what? Put your thumb on me all you want. I'm still going to out-jump you. I'm still going to outplay you. I'm still going to outthink you, dream you, and quantify what freedom is because you don't even know what it is. And so, again, it's tough for me to really go, these are the 5 most popular records today in the world in terms of jazz. I think Kind of Blues probably obvious. Love Supreme. Coltrane's a little bit tougher because there's a number of Coltrane records you might elect to that seat. I would think Love Supreme is probably the one that's the most signature, but My Favorite Things, Blue Train. There's a number of Coltrane records where you could probably Ellington. Harmon. Those records are so incredible. The Ballads record is one of my favorites. But, so it's probably Love Supreme with Coltrane. And then I think from a lot of people, you'd probably get more the George Benson type jazz, especially the black community. I DJ'd a party again on Halloween last Saturday, for my black community friends up in Twin Cities. It was great to see a lot of those faces and play a lot of those songs, and knowing that you're playing songs that you probably can't play for a white audience and expect a response. That's the key. You can play songs for anybody, but if you want to create energy, you have to create connection and a sense of belonging, a sense of I need to tune into them. And when you're sitting there in the audience and I connect with you by playing stuff you like and are familiar with, it validates you, which validates what I'm doing, and it creates a common bond. And so to sit there and being aloof and playing stuff all night that nobody in the room knows is very self-indulgent, and it's hard to keep people coming in without connecting. And so that's going to be my challenge here, is to play jazz, but in a way that there's cross-reference points. And you can go from a nice jazz track into a Ray Charles song, and you can do some Ray Charles doing country music even, and then maybe throw in, an old country sounding thing, and then go back to some Charlie Christian. But yeah, what do you guys think of the 5 most popular jazz records today? Not your favorite, not the ones you think should be the most important, but the ones you think that the most people who aren't really jazz fans would know and recognize. And I think sometimes they don't even recognize certain album covers, like that Monk record on Columbia, because it's just called Monk. I think that record's kind of iconic, that cover, but I don't know if people really know that music. Dexter Gordon's on Do Tune, that Dexter Gordon plays Hot and Cool, is that what it's called? That album cover is pretty iconic as well, with the smoke and all that. But I don't think people know the music or could even tell you who Dexter Gordon was. So it's a wonderful, wonderful exercise, just trying to recognize and add some humility to our comprehension of this music, because when we remember how baby step and basic most people's digestion of jazz has been, I think it'll help us recalibrate how we discuss it and how we approach it and how we try to promote it to other people. People are very much on the first steps of the slide. They're not ready for that high jump. They want to have baby steps. So today we're going to do a hidden classic, and we're in the volume 4 on this. And then I think later in the week I'm going to do another reacts to. And that was pretty fun, and it didn't get taken down. So I think we're good to go on that. Just don't get to monetize it. But again, it's not a big deal unless I go viral tomorrow, which I don't think that's ever going to happen, because we're just not gimmicky and attracting a bunch of 15-year-olds. And you kind of need to do that to go viral, I think. There's probably not a lot of videos going viral in the over 55 set. And that's definitely who one of my main demographics is, according to my channel. It's 35 to 50 to 49 and 49 to 65. Like those are the 2 groups I really, and male. Boy, there's not a lot of females watching this channel or probably jazz channels in general, which is too bad. I do have a few, and some of them comment quite a bit actually, but and good for you gals, love you. But my demographics are probably 98% male, which is pretty nuts that it's so, angled one way like that. Why is that so? I think that speaks something again about who becomes jazz fans. It's a certain type of kind of, not quite an alpha male, but a guy who wants to be unique and different and intellectually and seen a certain way. I'm posh and I'm sophisticated. I guess, speaking for myself on some level, this is how I wanted to be perceived as well. I think we get into jazz for some of those reasons at times. We drive a Jaguar. We eat in certain restaurants. We wear certain clothes. We look a certain way, all because we want to impress upon people how we want you to see me. And so I think a lot of people get into jazz for that reason. It's supposed to be sophisticated. I can put my monocle in, and it makes me look elegant, which it does. It is a sophisticated music. It is a very modern, beautiful art form. It's just, I think when we do it for those reasons, we can gloss over a lot of what's really going on, which is too bad. But so here we go with a hidden classic. And we're going back on this one a little bit. And in some ways, this is the dawning of modern jazz and the sounds of modern jazz. And this is from young Charlie Christian. And Charlie comes from Oklahoma and was discovered by the great talent scout whose name escapes me right now, John Hammond, I think it was. And he convinces young Charlie to go to New York to play with the great Benny Goodman. And Benny Goodman, of course, was the king of swing. He was this Jewish white cat from Chicago, raised in poverty and a real difficult young life he had, which gives him some legitimate soul to express through his art. Benny's a bad boy. Benny could play his butt off. Benny was a difficult man at times, but Benny was by no means a Paul Whiteman, where it's just kind of a watered down version of black music. Goodman was a real player. And Goodman always attracted the best musicians. And it's Goodman who breaks the color line in the mid 30s with Teddy Wilson and Lionel Hampton, and starts bringing those guys on tour. Starts doing the trio and quartet sets with Gene Krupa. And, Goodman's a real innovator and fearless in his ability to take risks. And we don't think that having black men in my group is that risky. It was risky. That's the America these people lived in. Risky, dangerous, life-threatening. And Goodman didn't care. And Norman Granz, there's a few others in this business that really, from the white perspective, were ambassadors for the black cause and championed these young black men. John Hammond, of course, was another. But Goodman was a very talented guy, and to bring Christian to Goodman was the biggest stage you could put Charlie Christian on. And so Goodman didn't have any reservations about having young black talent in his band. And so it made sense to say, Christian, you are so great. This is amazing what you're doing. I'm going to bring you right to the number one stage in the land where Benny Goodman's playing. And he plays with Goodman's orchestra and sets them on fire. And he does some recordings, but he leaves shortly after. And in 41, he finds himself in New York. And this is shortly before his passing. I think it was tuberculosis, if I remember. Mine's a little fuzzy right now. But Charlie wasn't long for this world, sadly, but his innovations are impacting everybody. And he's a precursor to bebop in some ways. Even Parker acknowledges Christian's contributions and the free, loose lines. This could be Grant Green doing bebop on the guitar. And so it's interesting that the guitar is actually on the forefront of innovation here, when it's really an instrument that hasn't really been a part of the jazz landscape really at all. The unelectrified guitar wouldn't stand out in an orchestra or big band setting. And so you had very few people using guitar. George Barnes comes along and does some early stuff. There's a few other cats who have documented that were from that era. One fellow who's a trombone player also plays some guitar, whose name Durham. I can't think of his name. But so Christian finds himself in New York, and he ends up playing at Minton's up in Harlem, where these jam sessions are going on every night. And the Minton story is one that's interesting of itself. Minton was a black politician who used to be a former musician himself, a jazz musician. I'm just going to pause this for a second. All right, I found it. It says Henry Minton, a former saxophonist who had been the first Negro delegate in local 802. So that's actually a union thing. Converted the dilapidated room into a club at the Hotel Cecil on West 118th Street in Harlem, and opens up Minton's nightclub. Installed Teddy Hill as a manager, and made the place an open house for musicians where jam sessions were practically a nightly event. And so a bashful, polite, small-town boy, Charlie Christian, comes in there, and he's playing here with the great Milt Hinton on bass, I think it is. It says Nick Finton, but I think it's probably Milt Hinton. Kenny Clark is on the drums, one of the great innovators of the drums. Thelonious Monk's on the piano. And the guy by the name of Joe Guy is on the trumpet. And I think people thought that was Dizzy Gillespie initially, and it was falsely labeled as such. Although there is a session from 1941 with Dizzy Gillespie on the same little label. This is the Esoteric label. So this recordings are getting from 41, and this probably came out on 10-inch in 1949-50 on Esoteric. It's Esoteric number 1. I showed you those two other Esoteric 10 inches a couple episodes back. I'll show you again. I have another Dizzy Gillespie Esoteric coming in the mail. It's kind of tied up right now. There's a Rusty Diedrich on Esoteric. There's also a great record on Esoteric by Al Haig, which I have not tracked down a copy of at an affordable price. So Esoteric only has 7 or 8 jazz titles. They're also doing some classical stuff. But this stuff was deemed important enough to reissue, and it comes out again with footprints on the cover on the LP era, The Legends of 1941. I can't remember, something like that. But Christian here is so brilliant. He's so, and what's important to understand is this actually sounds quite modern. It's got a bit of that. I mean, this was recorded by some guy in the audience, something Newman, I think his name was, who would bring a tape recorder down, Jerry Newman, and he'd bring down his recording equipment and would record stuff. And sometimes there'd be too many people on stage to even bother, you know. And Christian would just sit back and play chords. But on the nights where he was inspired, his playing, it's just magnetic. It just draws you in, and there's nothing not modern about what he's doing here. The tone, I mean, and the electrical amped guitar is a big part of this leap that the guitar makes. And so Christian really does a lot to establish not just the guitar, but this new format of playing. And this is a great documentation of it. There are some copies of this out there on Discogs now, probably a couple on eBay as well. 40 to 70 bucks probably is what you should pay for that. It's an important piece. It's got a young Thelonious Monk who's still kind of shaping his sound. So he was influenced by Charlie Christian. It's really crazy how modern, sophisticated, fluid, on a piece of technology, the guitar amp, that was relatively brand new. So he seemed to master, and as a drummer, I can tell you this, I'd rather play with a guitar player with a shitty amp that just wants to play than a guy with all kinds of gear who doesn't know how to play. You know what I mean? If two guitar players walk into a bar, and one guy's got a little combo and he just plugs in and starts playing, and the other guy's setting up gear for an hour, that guy with the small amp can play. The other guy likes playing with knobs. You know, that's my experience. And this guy here can write grooves. This guy here's going to want to sit back and noodle and be unsure of himself. But, so anyway, Charlie Christian, fantastic piece. Pretty tough to come by. You probably won't find it in the wild, but you can go to Discogs or eBay and find it. Esoteric #1, Jazz Immortal. And they don't really assign that label. I think Clifford Brown gets it. So we're going to leave that and go back to the thought of the 5 most popular jazz records today for a second. And weigh in the comments what you think they are. You know, is Lee Morgan get into that mix? Does, you know, the Blue Notes canon's also elevated. That it's fairly likely. You know, you could probably say there's a second Miles Davis record in that mix of the 5-10 most popular jazz records today. And I think most of the big sellers of that time won't be anywhere near the landscape today. And it's also important to remember that the white jazz musicians outsold the black jazz musicians 5-10-1 in most cases. They were on bigger labels. They had a bigger audience to sell to. They had an audience with more disposable income to buy records. Not saying black people didn't buy records, but again, they're a tenth of the population. And so black records, race records, they sold some to white college kids, but the perception and how we shop today is quite different from the reality of it. You know, I mean, they say the successful Blue Notes sold 5,000 copies, and Bill Evans' first record at Riverside, 1955, sold 200 copies in its first year. So the numbers are so small. And some of these pressings today that are putting out these reissues, they're doing more pressings in one run than a lot of these records in their initial runs. And again, that's where, when you start talking about Verve or Impulse, those labels made a lot more. You start talking about Columbia, now you're talking about hundreds of thousands of records. So there's a big gap between what some labels are doing versus what some of the other bigger labels could accomplish. So check out Charlie Christian. Very important, integral part of the development of the sounds of jazz. He was a player that was modern from the second he plugged in. His ability, his fluid approach, his melodic structuring, his freedom, his ability to comp endlessly. He just was a natural, a gifted soul. And again, where would a guy like Charlie Christian have gone? You hear in George Benson, who comes along decades later. That tone, that sound, there's a lot of just incredible tonality and production just in his own sound, which is pretty impressive when you think of these are the first guitar amps ever. So they were probably very limited in what they could do. Tonality, pitch, reverb, echo, delay, all that stuff. It wasn't filled with gadgets and gidgets. It had a few knobs, if that. And his ability to just crank out effortless, beautiful tonality in that new formula is a very impressive thing. So anyway, my name is Dan the Jazz Shepherd. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. If you like real talk about jazz and the history and the music and how it all correlates and what it all means, that's what we want to discuss. And it's not just about my interpretations. I want you guys to share, and as you do, your feedback and your feelings as well. In my last episode, I had this little cool lead-in where I talk about if you're thinking about this, looking at your speakers, and not this, and I showed Martin Luther King at Selma, how can you feel this? And that was John Coltrane's army photo. How are you going to feel what Coltrane's saying if you ain't thinking about Selma and you thinking about your gear and you want to feel it, which is how you really hear it. You got to kind of put yourself in their shoes at times and understand the setting that it exists in. So, and again, Christian, the young man from Oklahoma, and I'm going to go back to my trading cards here as soon as the cafe opens. My downtime, I'll be able to work on those and kind of focus on that again. It's a bit of a difficult thing to kind of have multiple things going on for me. I could have kept working on the cards, but I probably wouldn't have put the same degree of effort and focus, and I probably would have been unhappy with some of the results. And so I'm going to pick it up again here. And the reason why I mentioned that is because Oklahoma is more of a hotbed for jazz than you ever would have imagined. I think I mentioned that once before. Christian, the aforementioned Chet Baker, if I remember, was an Oklahoman. So we'll talk to you all soon. If you want to support the channel, go to my Patreon page in the description below and pledge a few dollars a month. That always is appreciated and valued. You guys have a great day. Stay blessed. We'll talk to you all soon. Peace.